So basically, yesterday we have started discussing about constructor, and we have discussed what is a constructor, how to call a constructor, and how a constructor is created by the compiler, how a constructor we can create it as a developer, and how the constructor is going to be executed, and what exactly a constructor is doing. So basically, we have discussed a constructor is a special method inside a class, which is basically used to initialize the data member. We have static data member and we have non-static data member, right? So to execute static data member, we have static constructor. To execute non-static data member, we have non-static constructor, right? So then we have discussed, if as a developer, if we are not providing any constructor explicitly, then compiler will going to provide you the constructor at the time of program compilation. And constructor role is only limited. What is the role of a constructor? Constructor is going to initialize the data member. That's it. No other role. No further things the constructor is going to be, right? It's only going to execute, or you can say it is only going to initialize the either static data members or non-static data members. If you are creating any static constructor, then that static constructor is going to initialize the static data member. And if you are creating a non-static constructor, then it is going to execute, or you can say it is going to initialize the non-static data members of a class, right? So with this keep in mind, let us proceed and try to understand what are the different types of constructors available in .NET framework, or you can say CSharp supported, what are the different kind of constructors, right? So please look at my screen. So my screen is visible to all of you, right? Right, my
Yes.
screen is visible.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, right. So you can say in C#, we have 5 different kind of constructors. One is default, or you can say parameter less constructor. Another is parameterized constructor, and then static constructor, then copy constructor, then private constructor. See, these are not a different category of a constructor. These are also, you can say, parameterized or parameterless constructor, but we are creating them as a separate category, right? So we will basically, if we are speaking frankly, then we have two types. One is parameterless and another is parameterized, or you can say one is implicit constructor, one is explicitly constructor. But here I'm giving you the detailed information that these kind of constructors you can create it. You can create a copy constructor. Copy constructor is nothing but a parameterized constructor only, right? You can create a static constructor. Static constructor is nothing but it is going to be a parameterless constructor only. You can also create a private constructor, which is also going to be either a parameterless or parameterized constructor. But we can create a parameterized constructor as a copy constructor. We can create a constructor as a static constructor explicitly, right? So everything we are going to discuss in this session. First of all, so we have already discussed what is a default or parameterized constructor. Let's read the definition. If a constructor method does not take any parameters, then we call it a default or parameterless constructor. See, if you are creating a constructor and if that constructor doesn't take any parameter, right? So if you are creating a constructor and if that constructor doesn't take any parameters, then we can say that is a default constructor, or we can say that is a parameterless constructor, right? And again, this parameterless constructor or this default constructor, as a programmer, as a developer, we can define in our class, right? It is also possible that we can create one constructor without any parameter, and if we do so, then it is said to be a user defined default constructor, or you can say user defined parameterless constructor. But as a developer, we have not create or any constructor in our program. Then compiler will going to provide you one constructor, and that constructor is also going to be parameterless. So that compiler given constructor, which is parameterless, we can say that the system defined default constructor. Why? Because compiler means only the system, na? If the system is going to provide you a constructor, and if that constructor doesn't take any parameter, then we can say that it is a system defined default constructor only, right? So basically you need to understand the default constructor or parameterless constructor are of two types, right? We will see everything in practical. What is system defined default constructor and what is user defined default constructor? Simply speaking, if the default constructor is provided by the system, if the constructor, or you can say if the default constructor is provided by the system means your compiler, then it is said to be system defined default constructor. And if the default constructor, when I'm saying default constructor means it's a parameter less constructor, right? If the parameter less constructor is provided by the user, then it's said to be a user defined default constructor, right? So let's start, let us see some example using this system defined default constructor, then we'll see practical implementation of a user defined default constructor, right? See, as a programmer, if we are not defined any constructor explicitly in our program, then by default, the compiler will provide one constructor at the time of program compilation. That constructor, that parameterless constructor, which is provided by the compiler or system, is called as a default constructor. The default constructor will assign default values to the data members, right? The default constructor will assign default values to the data members. See, I'm saying non-static variables, right? As of now, we are not discussing about static constructor. Here we are discussing about the non-static constructor. We will come to that point. What exactly a static constructor, how the static data members are going to be initialized. So when we discuss static constructor, at that time I will explain to you that thing. But now we are discussing about the non-static constructor, right? The default constructor, or you can say the non-static default constructor, will assign default values to the data members. That is non-static variable, right? So when I'm saying default values, don't consider that the default value of the data type, right? It might be possible that while you are creating the variable, you are assigning some default values. That default value, if you are assigning, then it will initialize the variable with that default value only, right? Whatever what value you are assigning, it will initialize with that assigned value. That is also default value, right? And if you are not assigning any value, then only it is going to provide you the default value based on the data type, right? We will see this thing in practical, right? So for understanding, let us understand this with one example, right? So I'm copying the code. Okay, so you can see this is our class employee. In this employee class, I have created some variables, right? So you can say I have created some 5 variables. But if you look at this class doesn't have any constructor, but we are able to create the instance. So whenever we are creating the instance means we are calling one constructor. We are calling one constructor, and that constructor is going to initialize the variable of the class. Right? What is the constructor? Here we are calling this constructor. Then can anybody tell me what is the use of this new keyword?
Initiate the object.
Yes. So it will basically create the memory, right? It will allocate some memory in the RAM. It will allocate some memory in the heap area of the RAM, right? So basically you can say it's a 2 integer type variable, 2 string type variable, 1 boolean type variable. So based on the data type, it will allocate some memory for the ID variable. It will allocate some memory for the edge view. That memory allocation will be done by this new operator. And you can say this is a constructor call. So this is nothing but a constructor. Constructor name is same as the class name. Here the class name is employee, so the constructor name is employee. This is nothing but a function calling statement only. So when this constructor is called, that means the constructor of the employee class is going to be called. But if you look at the employee class definition, we do not have defined any constructor explicitly. Then what happens? Then how the constructor is going to be executed? Now the compiler will check, is there any explicit constructor defined by the programmer within this class? No explicit constructor provided by the programmer. Then what the compiler will do is, so it will create one default constructor, and that default constructor is going to initialize all these data members with the default values. So whenever I'm saying default value means, so based on the data type, if you are not assigning any value, then that value is going to be assigned. For example, suppose I'm assigning this age variable with the value 25, right? So in this case, you can see ID, we have not assigned any value, but for age, we assign some value, right? That means the constructor will going to assign some default value for the ID, means you are not assigning any value. So what is the data type? Integer. So what is the default value for numeric data type? 0. So it will assign 0 to the ID value. Then what is the default value for age? Are you assigning something? Yes, I'm assigning some default value. What value you are assigning? I am assigning 25 to this age variable. So the constructor is going to be created this age variable with this default value. So default value doesn't mean it is going to be always based on the data type. It is mean if you are not assigning any value, then it is based on the data type. But if you are assigning some value, then that assigned value will be as a default value for this variable, right? Now, once you execute this program, then you will see that, so suppose what is the default value for address? String means it's going to be a null value. You cannot see anything in the address, right? Suppose I'm assigning some default value for the name, some Ramesh I'm assigning, then you will see that for address it is going to print null because the default value for string data type is null. But for name, you will see that it is going to print the value Ramesh because we have assigned some default value to this name. So in this case, it is not going to take the default value of the string data type. It will take the default value what we are assigning to this variable. But for this address variable, what is the default value? We are not assigning anything. Then it will check the data type. What is the data type? String. What is the default value of string data type or any reference data type? Null. So it will take null. And that null you cannot see here. Null means nothing. It will not print anything, right? And for Boolean type, what is the default value? So Boolean is taking two values only. One is true and another is false. So in this case, the default value for Boolean data type is going to be false. Now if you execute this program, then it will print the value as per our discussion. Let's run the application and see the output. Right? So you can see, guys. Okay. So for the ID, it is printing 0 because the default value of integer is 0. For age, it is taking the default assigned value 25. Employee age is, so yeah. So we have done some mistake here. What mistake we have done? ID. So it is going to be name, right? It is going to be age, and it is going to be your address, right? So we have done some mistake in our code. So let me copy this example. Let me paste it here, right? Okay. Now run the application once more. Right. Now you can see the data as expected. ID is 0. Name is Ramesh because we assigned some value Ramesh to the name variable. Age is 25 because we have assigned age 25 to this age variable. Employee address is, you can see it is nothing. It is not printing anything because it's null. Null means you cannot print that value. And employee address permanent. So default value is false. So that is what it is printing in the console. So let me take the screenshot of this output. Okay. And let me put it here. Right. Is that clear? Yeah. Any doubt from this example? Can anybody tell me?
No, it is clear.
Okay. Now see, then what? So this is our code before compilation. But once you compile this code, it will be your code after compilation. You can see inside the employee class, in our source code, you can see we do not have any constructor. But after compilation, this parameterless public constructor is going to be provided by the, who will provide this? It's going to be provided by the compiler, right? So you will be having some confusion because I have taken this example without assigning anything. But in this case, in this example, we are assigning some values, right? So don't be confused with that. Okay, let me do the changes. Let me delete this one. delete this one. Okay. Now run the application and see the output. See, now every variable is going to be assigned with the default values based on the data type only, right? So, but the thing that you need to remember, default value doesn't mean only the value of the default value of the data type. It means also that what value you are assigning the variable at the time of initialization or declaration. So, if you are assigning some value at the time of a declaration, that assigned value is also going to be your default value. See, this is your public constructor. Now, if you want to see this practically, so what we can do is, so we can go to the location where our exe or assembly is created. Our assembly is created inside the bin and debug folder. You can see encapsulation demo is nothing but your assembly name. So assembly are of two types. One is DLL and one is exe. So if you are creating a console application, then your assembly is going to be exe. But if you are creating some class library project, some web application, then the assembly is going to be .dll. We'll discuss that later. But for now, let's go to the let's open Visual Studio Developer command from. And once you open, then type ILDASM, right? So once you type ILDASM, then open your assembly. So where assembly is created inside our project bin and debug folder. So once you open the assembly, then select the assembly, then open that assembly. Once you open, then you will see that this constructor demo is nothing but your namespace. So you can compare, this is your namespace. This namespace having how many classes? 2 classes. So you can see there are 2 classes. This constructor demo first name is the namespace and employee is the class. You can see constructor demo.test. So demo is the namespace and test is the class. You can see employee and the text, right? And within the employee class, you can see these are properties we define. Name is permanent, ID, age, address. So these are nothing but your properties, what you defined in your class. So we define 5 properties. These are the 5 properties, right? Apart from that, those 5 properties, you can see we have a non-static constructor. See, this is not preceded with S keyword. It is not preceded with the S means it's a non-static constructor. We'll see that static constructor later, but for now, this is your non-static constructor, right? And if you open anything, then it is going to be your compiled code. Compiled code means after compilation, what code is generated by Microsoft is IL code, intermediate language code, or you can say MSIL code, Microsoft Intermediate Language Code. This is nothing but your Microsoft Intermediate Language Code for this constructor. Now, if you open this, so this is nothing but your intermediate language code for the address properties, right? So these are the things that you need to understand. Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Similarly, if you look at the text class, you will see that one constructor and one main method. So by default, it's a non-static class. Non-static class means mandatory one constructor is going to be created if you have not provided any constructor explicitly, right? And that is going to be non-static constructor. And you can see it's a main method. This main method is static or not? So you will see that this main method is preceded with the keyword with the symbol S. S means it's a static method. Is that clear?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Okay, fine. So once you see this, then you need to close this. Why? Because if you have not closed this ILDSM tool, then you cannot run or you cannot debug this application anymore further. If you are doing any changes, then it will not work. Right. So the point that you need to keep in mind is that compiler will only provide the default constructor if, as a programmer, we are not defined any constructor explicitly. Is that clear? When only compiler going to provide you the constructor means as a developer, if we are not providing any constructor explicitly. That is the first part, and that you need to understand. In this case, you can see as a developer, we are not providing any constructor. And as a developer, as we are not providing any constructor in the employee class or in the text class, we can see that inside employee class, compiler will provide one constructor. Inside a test class, compiler also provide another constructor, right? So that we have just seen, right? Is that clear or any doubt?
Clear, sir.
Clear.
Okay. So we have discussed what is system defined default constructor. So whenever I'm saying default constructor means it is parameterless. And you can see the compiler what constructor is provided, that is going to be public and parameterless. You can see this is employee doesn't taking any parameter, right? So this is going to be your parameterless constructor. Then when do we need to provide the constructor explicitly? See, if we want to execute some custom logic at the time of object creation, that logic may be object initialization logic or some useful logic, then as a developer, we must provide the constructor explicitly, right? Suppose you want to execute some custom logic, right? And or if you want to initialize the variables of the class with some custom values, then as a developer, we need to provide the constructor explicitly, right? Then what is user defined constructor? What is user defined default constructor? Now the constructor which is defined by the user without any parameter is called user defined default constructor, right? Suppose as a developer or suppose as a programmer, we are creating one constructor in our class, and if that constructor doesn't take any parameter, then that constructor is said to be user defined default constructor, right? Let us see this example also. Right. So in this case, you can see this is my employee class. Same example I'm taking. So this is your class having some properties, right? And you can see this is your method, right? And inside this this is your constructor. And you can see this is a constructor, and this constructor is not taking any parameter, right? This is a parameterless constructor. As it is a parameterless constructor, as this constructor is provided by the developer or provided by the programmer, so we can say that it is a user defined default constructor. And as I mentioned, default constructor means it is going to initialize the data member with default values. The same thing what the implicitly constructor, what the compiler given constructor does, the same thing is going to be done by this constructor. What it means? Now it means each time you create the object, it will initialize all these variable with the default values only. That means no matter how many number of time you created the object, it is going to create this object with the ID value 100. It is going to create the object with the age value 30. It is going to create the object with the address value name is permanent. So every time you create the object, all the object, each instance of the class is going to be created with the same set of values, right? No matter how many number of objects you created, the same set of values it is going to assign each time you create the object for this variables, right? So as this constructor is provided by the compiler, provided by the user, and as it is a parameterless constructor, we can say it is a user defined default constructor, or you can say it is a user defined parameterless constructor. Right? So you can say this is user defined default constructor or the user defined parameterless constructor, right? So once we initialize this, we have created one display function, and within this display function, we are just printing the values, right? So what is the object storing for the ID variable, age, address, name, everything we are going to print. And you can see from the main method, we are creating one instance of employee one, and we are just calling the display method, right? So now if you execute this program, then you will see that what value we are assigning to these variables going to be printed when we call the display method. Let's run the application. See, so these values are going to be printed, right? So you can see now as we are providing this constructor explicitly, then compiler will not provide any constructor implicitly, right? To prove this, what we can do is we can check the IL code and we will see whether this employee class having only one constructor or two constructor, right? If it is having only one constructor, means it is our constructor. It is the constructor developed by us. If it is having two constructor, means one constructor is provided by us and another constructor is provided by the compiler. Let's see how many constructors are there within this employee class. So what you need to do? You need to do the same thing. You need to open the ILDSM tool. Open the ILDSM tool, then go to file, open. Okay, let's load the assembly or exe, you can say. Okay, you can see, check the employee class. employee class, you can see these are the variables. This is your constructor and this is your display method. How many constructor are there in your employee class? Only one constructor. Only one constructor means the constructor which is defined by us. If compiler provide another constructor, then there should be two constructor. But you can see in the intermediate language code, we are having only one constructor. One constructor means this constructor is provided by the developer only. You might be confusing that, sir. Previously, the constructor which is created by the compiler, the same signature this constructor having, right? So how can you say that it is the constructor provided by the developer? It might be the constructor provided by the compiler. Yes, we can prove this. How we can prove this? Let us change the signature, right? As of now, the constructor method, what you are doing, it is not taking any parameter. Let's add some parameter. Let's add some variable called x inside this method. Now, if our understanding is same, then the constructor signature means it is taking one integer parameter. Yes or no? Right? Now, if okay, so can anybody tell me why I'm getting this compiler error?
Yeah, ILTS is okay.
Sorry? No, ILTS tool is not. I have closed that one. Because see, now your constructor taking one parameter, yes or no?
Yes.
That means while creating the object, you need to pass some value to that parameter or not?
Yes.
So here I'm not passing. So let's pass the value 10 and let's debug this one. Give me 1 minute. Okay, so let's build the application, build successful. Now open the ILDSM tool and now go to the file, open and load the exe. Right now you can go to the employee class and you can see now this constructor taking one int 32. Int 32 means what? It is integer type parameter. Yes or no? Is there any other constructor which is void constructor? I mean, parameter less constructor in your employee class? No. That means this constructor is not provided by compiler. It is the user defined constructor. As a developer, we are providing this constructor. But if you go to the program class, you will see that the default constructor, parameter less constructor. This constructor is provided by the compiler, but this constructor is defined by the user. Why it is provided by the compiler? Because in the program class, we have not defined any constructor. Right? Why in this employee class compiler doesn't provide any constructor? Because we as a developer providing the constructor explicitly. And the rule of constructor is that if as a developer we are defining any constructor explicitly, then compiler will not provide any constructor. Compiler will only provide constructor if as a developer, if as a programmer, we are not defining any constructor explicitly in our class. Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay, fine. Right. Now one more point we need to understand. See, what is the problem with this default constructor? Right. What is the problem with this default constructor? The problem with this default constructor is that each time you create the object, right? Each time you create the object is going to be created with same set of values, no matter the number of times you create the object. For example, you can see I'm creating here two objects, so emp1 and the emp2, right? And I'm invoking the display method. Even you created another object, let's say I'm creating another object emp3, right? So no matter how many number of objects you created, each time you create the object is created with same set of values. When I'm saying object is created means whatever the property variable this class having, those variables are going to be created with the same set of values. Now here I'm creating 3. So now let's execute this. So once you execute, you will see that employee ID is going to be same for all the 3 objects. So you can say employee ID 100 for employee 1, the same for employee 2, the same for employee 3. Name is going to be same. Address is going to be same, right? So everything is going to be same. There is some issue in the in this statement. Let's fix that. So employee ID is name, address. So this is going to be S, not right. So every time you run this application, you will see the same set of values. So ID 100 is 30, ID 100 is 30, ID 100 is 30, right? That means if you are creating a default constructor, if you are creating a parameterless constructor, then you cannot initialize each instance with a different set of values, right? If you are using the default constructor, whether it is a compiler given default constructor or it is a user defined default constructor, then you cannot create each instance with the same set of values. Each instance is going to be created with the same set of values. If you want to create each instance with a different set of values, that means you want employee 1 having the ID 100. When I'm creating employee 2, the ID should be 101. When I'm creating employee 3, the ID should be 103, right? Similarly, for employee 1, the age is going to be a different value. For employee 2, the age is going to be a different value. For employee 3, the age is going to be a different value. That means if you want to initialize each instance of the object with a different set of values, then you cannot use this default constructor, which is either provided by the compiler or which is either implemented by the program. Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay. Then what is the solution? The solution is parameterized constructor. That means if you want to initialize the object dynamically with user given values, or if you want to initialize each instance of a class with a different set of values, then we need to use parameterized constructor. Then what is the advantages of using parameterized constructor? Using a parameterized constructor, we can initialize each instance with a different set of values, right? Using parameterized constructor, we can initialize each instance of a class or each object of a class with a different set of values. For object 1, the value is going to be some value, right? For object 2, it is going to be a different value. For object 3, it is going to be another set of values. That means we have the chance, we can initialize each instance of the class with a different set of values. How we can do this? By using parameterized constructor. Then what is parameterized constructor? Now the user defined constructor with parameter is called parameterized constructor, right? The user defined constructor with parameters is called parameterized constructor. And guys, parameterized constructor means as a developer, you can only provide a parameterized constructor. Parameterized constructor cannot be implicitly defined by the compiler. That means if you want to pass some parameter while creating the instance, then you need to go for parameterized constructor. So using parameterized constructor, we can initialize each instance of a class with a different set of values. For understanding, let's see this one. So this is a class, and this class having one parameterized constructor. Why I'm saying this parameterized constructor means it is taking one parameter I. Yes or no? So as it is taking one parameter I, so while creating the instance, we need to pass parameter for this I. See here, I'm not passing parameter. Then the constructor is saying that it is asking to supply the value for the I. And it is also saying what kind of value you need to pass. You need to pass some integer kind of a value. So you can pass some integer value. Suppose I am passing the value 10, right, while creating the instance. So that 10 will become and will be sit inside this I variable, right? So let's see this example practically. Okay, see, okay, see here what I'm doing now. Here I'm creating one constructor, and this constructor having this class having one constructor. This constructor taking some integer parameter, and it is just printing that statement and that value in the console. Now if you look at this, see, whenever I'm writing this, it is saying me that parameterized constructor integer I, means it is giving you information. If you want to create an instance of this parameterized constructor class, it is your responsibility to provide some value. It is your responsibility to provide some value. Suppose I'm providing 10, then that error will become and that 10 will become, and that 10 will be stored inside this variable. Let's prove this practically, right? So now let's run the application. See, so this statement, from here we need to go to this place. So I'm just pressing F10. So you can see here what value we are passing. We are passing 10. Now, if you look at the I variable, it is holding that 10 passed value. So whatever value you are passing through the constructor, that value will become inside that constructor parameter. So here 10 is storing, and that 10 will be printed when this statement is executed, right? See, you can see that value 10 in the console. You can see 10 is printed here. Yes or no? So that parameterized constructor is called, and that value is printed here. So this is how parameterized constructor work. So in this way, we can create any number of instances of the class, and while creating the instance, we can pass different values, and those values will go and sit in the variable I. For example, suppose I'm creating 2 more instances, right? Suppose I'm creating 2 more instances, or you can create another instance like this, right? So I'm creating 3 instances class, and each time I'm creating the instance, I'm passing a different set of values, right? So in this case, if you run this application, you will see that 10, 20, and 30 will be printed, and each time the constructor is executed, right? Right. So each time the constructor is executed, what value we are passing, that value will be stored inside this variable, right? Is that clear how to call a parameterized constructor? Guys?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, the question is, when should we use parameterized constructor? Already we discussed. With the help of a parameterized constructor, we can initialize each instance of the class with a different set of values. That means using parameterized constructor, we can store a different set of values in the different instances created in the class. For example, you can see here we are declaring one variable X, right? And here I'm having one parameterized constructor, and here I'm printing the value of X. Now, okay. See, inside my class, okay, let me take this class, of the program class, so that it will be easier for understanding, right? So you can see this is a class. This class having one private variable, right? It's a private variable. Why? Because we are not providing any access specifier. If you are not providing any access specifier, then it is going to be private by default. See, if don't confuse with this access specifier. After 2 or 3 sessions, after this constructor chapter, we are going to discuss access specifier in detail. We have 6 access specifier in CSharp. Every access specifier we are going to discuss with example, right? So in this case, we have this constructor taking one parameter and printing that value, and within this display method, I'm printing the X value. Now I'm creating 2 instances of the parameterized constructor. Each time I'm creating the instance, I'm passing a different set of values. So for first time I'm creating the instance, I'm passing 10. Second time while creating the instance, I'm passing the value 20. Then I'm calling the display method. So can anybody tell me what will be the output? What it will print in this variable and what it will print in this case? Any idea from anyone?
It's going to print the value that you passed in.
Sorry. Any idea from anyone else?
I think the first
10, 20, 20.
So this will be first when it will created, it will print what value 10, and
10.
what it will print
0,
0.
0 or 10.
0.
0.
0. Why?
It is initialized. The variable is initialized to 0.
Yeah. So because we are taking this 10, but did we initialize that 10 with this variable? No, we are not initialized. If you are not initialized, then when this what value with this variable will be initialized? So we are not providing anything. Then what is the default value of an integer or any numeric? 0. then the constructor will initialize this variable with the value 0. So if you call this application for I, it is going to print 10, and for X, it is going to print 0. So let's see this. See, for X, it is printing 0, for I, it is printing 10 and 20. Now, my question is, as you can see in the above output, for both the instances, it is printing the X value as 0. In instance 1, we passed 10 to the constructor. And in instance 2, we passed 20 to the constructor. So can we use the pass values 10 and 20 in place of X? Right? So my question is that possible? What value I am passing through the constructor, can I initialize this X value with that passed value? Is that possible? Yes, it is possible. How? Now you need to initialize the variable X with the value what coming or what is coming and whatever we are sending while creating the instance with this X variable. How? Now what you need to do, X equals to, you need to write Y, I. So you can write this. So what value you are passing? 10. 10 will come to this I variable. Then again 10, we are initializing that value 10 to this X variable or not. So X will be replaced with value 10. So again, you are passing 20. That means that 20 will come and sit in this I variable. And again, we are assigning that 20 to the X variable. So in this case, for instance 1, for object 1, one memory of this variable will be created, right? For object 2, another memory of this variable will be created. That means now you are creating two instances. Two instances means this variable having two copies now available inside the memory. One copy for object 1 holding the value 10 and another copy for object 2 holding the value 20. That means when you invoke this method using object 1, so what value object 1 means for object 1, what value we are passing? 10. 10 it will print. For while creating the second object, what value we are passing? 20. So 20 will be printed. So in this case, now we cannot give guarantee what it will print. It will based on the object. You are creating the object with what value, that value it is going to print. For example, let's run the application and see the output and try to observe the output. So you can see this is our first object. So first object we are passing the value 10. So X is created with the value 10. For second object we are passing the value 20. That means X is created with the value 20. That means now with the parameterized constructor we can initialize each instance. Whenever I'm saying initialize each instance means initializing the data members of the class with a different set of values. You can see this is a single data member X, but for this object creation, this variable is going to be created with value 10. For this object creation, this variable is going to be created with the value 20. That means for each instance, for each object, we are assigning this variable with a different set of values or not. This is the advantages of using parameterized constructor. Is that clear?
Yes.
Sir, actually one doubt here.
Yeah, you can ask me.
Can we, like, when we call the parameterized constructor, suppose, how did that int X got initialized to 0? I mean, like, is there any default constructor calling along with this parameterized constructor?
See, whenever, suppose you have commented this one, right? Right. So this is a constructor, right? So as part of constructor, we can write any logic. So if you look at my definition, if you want to initialize the object dynamically with the user given values of, or if you want to initialize each instance of a class with a different set of values, then we need to use parameterized constructor, right? So in this case, whether it is a parameterized constructor, whether it is a parameter less constructor, whether it is a default constructor, after all, what is it? It is a constructor. Yes or no? As a constructor means it is going to initialize the data member. Yes or no? So that means whatever variable you have, all those variables are initialized with the default values. Default values means based on the data type or based on the assigned value. Once those variable initialization is done, then it will check, is there any statement is written inside this constructor? Yes, it is written. x equals to 20. That means this memory location again is going to be initialized with the incoming value. Is there any statement? Yes, one print statement is there. Then it will execute that print statement. Is that clear?
And like
Like
my
see,
question. Yeah.
whenever your constructor is executing means all the variable or memory location will be initialized. See, if you am writing integer y equals to 20, right? So here I'm assigning this value, or suppose I'm writing integer x and here I'm writing z, right? Suppose I'm writing like this. That means don't think that this is the two statement is going to be executed as part of the constructor, right? Don't think that. So first of all, what is the role and responsibility of a constructor? Initialization, right? Initialization means whatever the variable your class have, all those variables are going to be initialized. Okay, let me practically show this so that you will get some idea. So first of all, okay, so how many variables are there? Three variables. Right? So for the so whenever this new operator execute, the memory allocation will be done for x, y, and z. Yes. So this is the memory allocation for x, 2 bytes. For y, it is also going to be 2 bytes. For z, it is going to be for 2 bytes. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So memory allocation is done. Now constructor execution takes place. So the constructor is called. So this constructor is called with the value 10. So 10 will become to this, right? Before executing these two statements, first of all, initialize the variables with the values, right? Suppose here we have x, y, and z. And for y variable, we are assigning the value 20. For x and z, we are not assigning the value. You can say for x and z, we are not assigning anything. For x, it will first of all, it will initialize with 0. For y, it is going to initialize the memory location with the value 20, and for z, it is going to initialize the value 0, right? So this thing happens. Once these things are happened, that means constructor initialize the data member, then it will start executing the body, right? Once it start executing the body, it will check I variable is there. So x variable reinitialization statement is there. So what is the value of I now? We are passing 10, right? Yes or no? So 10 will be stored in I variable, and 10 again we are assigning to which variable? X. Yes or no?
Yes.
So that means this X location variable, what is there, it will be replaced with the value 10. Any other initialization statement is there? No. This printing statement is there, it will print the statement. Now currently for this object, right? Currently for this object, what is the value of x, y, and z? Let us print that x, y, and z. So here x, here y, and here it is going to be z, right? Now, as per our understanding, what value x holding 10, what value y holding 20, what value z holding 0. If this is what we are getting while printing the value, then our understanding is correct, right? Let's run the application and see the output. See what value it is printing for x 10, for y 20, for z 0. So as per our understanding, inside the memory for object 1, this value are holding or not? This is object 1. Yes or no?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Now.
So that means like when we call the even parameterized constructor, initially it initializes all the data members to their default values.
Right.
After we assign anything in that inside the body, then they will assign those values to the data members.
Right. See, if that is the thing that you need to understand. Suppose I have written only these two statements. That means I am only assigning x value na. If this is the statement only going to be executed as part of the constructor, then how this y and z value will be assigned? Right now, so y and z also going to be assigned with some value, with the default values, right? Assigning the variables, initializing the variable is the only responsibility of the constructor, right? Apart from that, you can write any additional logic. You can write initialization logic, You can write, if you want to execute some custom logic as part of your constructor, you can write anything as part of the constructor. But the main responsibility of constructor is to initialize the data member, right? Even if you write, even if you don't write this thing, then also it is going to initialize the data member. You are writing this means you are writing some additional logic. That additional logic may be your constructor initialization logic or maybe some other custom logic, right? So here I'm writing one initialization logic, and here I'm writing some custom logic to print the value of a tab. Is that clear?
Yes, sir. So custom private constructor will do the initialization first, and also if it requires, it can do the job of the normal method. If you write anything, it will also execute that.
Yes. Right, absolutely right. So first of all, initialization is done, right? No matter whether you write any initialization statement or not, the number of variables your class has, all the variables will be initialized with the default value. After they are initialized with the default value, then it will check, is there any reinitialization statement written as part of your constructor body? Yes, written, then reinitialize the variable. Not written, then don't reinitialize. What are the default value they are assigned with, that default value they are going to be called. But if you are using constructor, if you are using parameterized constructor, then you have the chance. Then what chance? That you can create this variable with a different set of values, right? Now you can write x equals to this. Even you can initialize yz with some different set of values like this. So you can take integer I, j, and integer k, and you can initialize x equals to I, y equals to j, and z equals to k. So you can also initialize like this. And while you are creating, so you need to pass 3 different values, right? Is that clear?
Yes, sir. And can we have multiple parameterized constructors?
Yes, that will come to after some time. Parameterized constructor can be multiple, constructor can be overloaded. All these things we are going to cover, right?
Okay. Thank you.
So now is that clear how the parameterized constructor is work, and how we can use parameterized constructor to create different instances with a different set of values. Is that clear?
Yes,
right?
yes, yeah.
Okay, so the example that we created for object 1, x variable will be created with the value 10, and for object 2, x is created with the value 20. That means now 2 copies of the x variable available in the memory, right? So that is the game. Now we have another kind of constructor, that is copy constructor. So what is a copy constructor? Now, if you want to create multiple instances with the same values, then we need to use copy constructor, right? If you want to create a multiple.
Can you go back to the previous program that you have shown?
Yes.
Yeah, that 200, 300, 400 you have written for object 2.
Yes.
Yeah, just run it, sir.
First object is created with the value 10, 20, 30. Second object is created with the value 200, 300, and 400. Any question?
Yeah.
Fine.
Got it. Yeah.
Fine. So what is a copy constructor, right? Copy constructor means if you have one constructor, right? If you have one constructor means you created one constructor with some set of values, and you want to create another instance, right? You want to create another instance with the same set of values. You understand my point? Guys, suppose you created one constructor, and you created for this example, suppose you created one constructor with the value 10, 20, and 30, right? And you want to create another constructor, I mean another object with this same set of values. Then two options are there. What are the options? You just need to copy this, right? You just need to paste it. So in this case, what will happen now? Both objects are going to be created with the same set of values. Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
But think that if your now the constructor is taking some few parameters, 3 parameters. If your constructor taking 50 parameters, do you think that passing the 50 parameter again and again is a good thing?
No.
No. Then in scenario like this, we can take the help of a copy constructor. What the copy constructor is do? So copy constructor is going to take a parameter of the class type. So here you can see the copy constructor takes a parameter of the class type. So what is your class? Parameterized constructor. So the copy constructor taking a parameter of class type. Suppose I'm saying that it's a copy CONST copy constructor, and then so whenever a constructor take a parameter of the class type, this is your class, and this constructor taking one parameter of this class type. So whenever a constructor take a parameter of the class type, then it is said to be a copy constructor. Now you might be one question, sir, how you can pass a parameter? So how you can pass a class type as a parameter? See, integer I understand, integer, float, character we understand. These are data type. Now how you can pass? But it is also a data type, right? Parameterized constructor means it's a class. A class is also user defined data type, right? So as it is a data type, so you can also pass a class, or you can also pass a reference type as a parameter. So in this case, this is a copy constructor. And in this case, why it is a copy constructor means it is taking one parameter of the class type. When the constructor taking one parameter of the same class type, it is a copy constructor. Now what we can do is this copy constructor having this value 10, 20, and 30. So what I can do is, so I can write dot x, I can write this dot y, and I can write copy const dot z. Now whatever value your constructor having, right, those values are going to be stored inside this. So in this case, how I can execute this constructor? This constructor taking one class as a parameter. So we need to pass one reference type variable while creating the object. So in this case, instead of this, I can pass this one. So this is a variable. So see, if I'm creating integer x, right? So if I'm creating integer x equals to 10. So here, instead of 10, I can pass x, no issue, right? So if I'm passing x means I'm passing the value 10. So here what x means? X is a variable. What is the type of the variable? Integer. As the variable type is integer, and I can pass x because this parameter, first parameter is integer. That means the type is same. So here integer type, here integer type. So I can pass this x because x is a variable of an integer type, and I can pass that value, and that value is going to be stored inside an integer variable. Now come to the parameterized constructor. What is the type of this parameter? Just tell me, what is the type of this parameter?
Class type.
Class.
That means if I want to invoke this constructor, I need to pass one value whose type is going to be this one or not? Yes or no?
Yes.
So in this case, I have created this parameter. So like this x is a variable, here obj1 also a variable. Here x is pointing, holding a value 10. Here obj1 holding a value which is nothing but going to be an object, right? So same thing. So here you can pass. So here, if I pass obj1, then what is the type of obj1? Obj1 type is parameterized constructor. This is a class type. So this class type means the parameter class type is going to be same. If it is going to be same, then I can pass this obj1. So when I pass obj1, then what will happen? Now this obj1 means that object what you created with the value 10, 20, and 30 will become inside this variable, right? And when you access that x means that x value, what value is stored inside the x variable? 10. That 10 will be assigned to this. 20 will be assigned to this. That's z value, I mean 30 is assigned to this. Let us see this practical. There are some error. What error? I doesn't exist. What I?
Line number 20.
Line number? Yeah,
20.
Yeah. So this is no more existence. Nah? Okay. And let me remove this one. This is not required anymore. Okay, let me start from here only. Right, see. So I have created one object. Object one is created. If you say, whenever you create an object, if you want to check that object, check if you want to check that object properties or members, you can click on this expand button. You can see this object having three properties or three variables: x holding the value 10, y holding the value 20, and z holding the value 30. Right? If you want to access x, how you can access x? obj.x. If you want to access that value 20, then how you will access? obj.y. How you will access that value 30? obj1.z. So when you write obj1.z means it will fetch that value 30. Right? In this case, once we execute the object one, the display statement, you will see that, right, that values are going to be printed in the console. See, x, y, and z, 10, 20, and 30 is printed on the console. Now, this is the important thing. So what I'm passing obj1. So obj1 means I'm passing these three set of values, x, y, and z. So whenever I'm passing this, so to store, suppose I'm creating one variable of x type. To store that x value, we need an integer type variable or not? If I'm passing x is an integer type variable. So to store that x value, I need an integer type variable. So here I'm passing obj1. obj1 is a type of parameterized constructor class. To store this obj1, I need a variable of this type. Yes, this type of variable we have created here. This is the type of the variable. So when I execute this value, so what value this obj1 is holding, all those values are going to be stored inside this reference variable. Right? Let's run this. Press F10. So once I press F10, the control moves to this because I am putting the debugger point here. Right now, press F10. Now, okay. Now, if you check this one, you will also get the same setup of values x, y, z. So now, copy const is your variable name, and x, y, z are the object location. I mean, inside the object, there are something called x and y and z memory allocation. And if you want to access this memory allocation, then you need to use this reference variable. So reference variable copy const dot x means it will give you 30. It will give you 10. So here I'm writing copy const dot x. If you want to check what value this variable is holding, so what you can do, just select this one, copy const dot x, right click, and there is an option called quick watch. So click on the quick watch, and you will see that copy const dot x means it is saying you 10. That means 10 will be stored inside this variable or not?
Yes.
Right. Suppose I am writing copy const dot y. So reevaluate. So what will be value? Copy const dot y means 20. That means we are assigning 20 to this y variable. Similarly, if I write copy const dot z, then it will assign 30 to this z variable. Is that clear?
Yes.
Now let's complete the execution. So these three statements are executed. These three statements are executed means this object is created with x, y, z variable with the same value as this one. Right? Now, press F10, the control will come back to this now. Now, if you check obj1 and obj2, both are having the same set of values. Now, if you execute this statement obj2.display, then it is also going to display the same values. So you can see x10, y20, z10, x10, y20, and z30. Is that clear? How the copy constructor works? Or anybody having any doubt?
So one small doubt, like the second parameterized constructor where you are passing the class type.
Yes.
So will that constructor again invoke the first constructor, or it is just
No.
takes one and
previously you asked, sir, can we parameterize the constructor? Can we define multiple constructor parameterized constructor? Yes. This is the example of a multiple parameterized constructor. It is one constructor. It is another constructor. This constructor not invoking this constructor. In this case, when this constructor will execute, first of all, it will initialize all these three variables with the default values. After it initialize this variable with the default value, then this statement are going to be executed, and it will reinitialize those variables with the value what is stored or what is coming through this parameter.
Yeah, I
Right?
think it will take the values from that object that is already created. Is it?
Yes, yes. That is means this is your object now. You have created already one object with the value 10, 20, and 30. That means that 10, 20, and 30 you are passing through. You are passing to this constructor, right? So this object one storing the value 10, 20, and 30. You are passing this 10, 20, 30 to this constructor. This constructor is nothing but your another overloaded version of, right? Another overloaded parameterized constructor. So, but this time this constructor taking a class type as a parameter. So whenever the constructor taking class type means it's a copy constructor, right? So what it will do, it will copy the values from this object to this object, right? So whenever this statement is executing means we are creating object 2, right? So whenever this statement is executing means we are creating object 1. So here we are creating object 2, but while creating object 2, what we are passing object 1. That means what value object 1 is holding, we are just creating the new object with the same values, right? Object 1 storing 10, 20, 30 means we are creating the new object with the value 10, 20, and 30. But before the same process, but before reinitializing this variable, first of all, it will initialize the memory location, right? But the thing that you need to remember, whenever you are executing this parameterized constructor, this memory location will be created and reinitialized, right? That means whenever you are creating again, another set of memory location will be allocated inside the memory. Don't think that it's the same memory location. The memory location is going to be different. So this is, for example, suppose this is your first object, right? So in this case, this is your first object, and this object is created with the value 10, 20, and 30, right? So again, when you execute this statement, right, it is not going to do anything with this memory location. So what it will do, it will create a brand new memory location, right? It will create a brand new memory location with the name object 2, right? And it will initialize this object 2 with the values from object 1. What is value object 1.x10? So that 10 will be stored inside this variable. Object 1.y 20 will be stored inside this variable. Object 1.30, that 30 will be stored inside this z variable. That means now inside the computer we have two memory allocation. Two memory allocation for x variable, one in object 1 and another in object 2. Two memory allocation for the variable y1 inside object 1 and in another one inside object 2, and the same for the variable z. Don't think that the z is initialized only once. Z is initialized twice because we are creating two instances. For each instance, the object is initialized. Object is initialized means for each instance the variables are going to be created. If you are creating two instances, that means the variables are going to be created 2 times inside the memory. Is that clear?
Yes, I think ideally now there are two XYZ sets, and one is for object 1 and one is for object 2. So
absolutely fine. That is the thing that I need to explain. See, object 1 having XYZ, object 2 is also having XYZ. Means two set of copies. See, if you are having only one set of copies, then how we can store two different values in a single memory location? Is that possible? X is going to hold a 10 as well as 20. That is not possible. Now. X is a value type. Value type means at any given point of time, it is going to hold a single value. Single value means either 10 or 20, right? So in this case, two different memory locations are created, one for object 1 and another for object 2. But as we are using copy constructor, so the two memory locations are going to be created with the same set of values, right? That is the point that you need to understand. Is that clear?
Yes, sir. But like, suppose if we call two parameterized constructor and we are assigning different values, will that be like again a copy of XYZ, or it will override the XYZ value?
See, we are just using copy constructor to copy the existing value to a new object. So this is your existing object, right? So this existing value we want to assign to a new object. That's why we are using copy constructor. See, instead of X, if you assign 30 here, right? Instead of Y, if you are assigning 100 here, then what will happen? So in this case, this X memory location is not going to be created with 10. So what value you assign? So for object 2, this memory location is going to be 30, right? For object 2, this memory location is going to be 30, right? For object 2, y is going to be created with the value, what value? 100. So this is going to be replaced with the value 100, right? And but for z, what you are doing, you are copying the z value from the existing object. So the z value is going to be same 30 in this case. So this is the memory architecture. So there is no relation between object 1 and object 2. Both are two different objects. That means object 1 means it's a separate object. Object 2 means it's a separate object. But in this case, what we are trying to achieve is we just want to copy the value of object 1, and we just need to create a new object with the same value as the object 1. That is the reason why we are going for the copy constructor, right? So in this case, this copy constructor, so this object 1, what value stored inside this z variable, we do not know. But what value is stored, that we want to assign to this newly created object z. Is that clear?
Oh, okay. So I mean, like, it depends on object. So each object utilizes all these data members separately. They will not get override like for different objects. Right,
absolutely. So whenever you are using a new means what? New means a new memory allocation for the data member. You are using new means this memory allocation will be done, and this constructor will initialize this variable, and that reference will be stored inside this variable. Again, new means again this variable's memory allocation will be done, and this constructor means it will initialize this memory allocations. And for initialization purpose, what we are doing, we are just copying the existing object value. That's why we are using copy constructor. If you don't want, you don't use, no matter. Right? Instead of this, you can also create you can pass some other parameters, right? That is also fine. But what is the main purpose of copy constructor? To copy the existing object values into a new object. Means this is our existing object, right? This object 1, obj 1 is our existing object. If you want to copy the existing object values means existing object data member values to a new object. If you want to create a new object same as object 1, then you need to use copy constructor. Same as object 1 means if you want to create x, y, and z variable with the same value as object 1, then you need to go for copy constructor. Right? But it is not mandatory. Even you cannot, if you don't use copy constructor, again you can also initialize the same. Right? Is that clear or still doubt?
Yes, perfect. Yeah, thank you.
So this is the copy constructor we have discussed, right? Next, see, obj 1 is a different memory location, and for obj 2 that is a different memory location. Now, how many constructor can be defined in a class? Already in this example we have two constructors. That means multiple constructors we can define in a class. So in a class we can define any number of a constructor. What the most important point that you need to remember is each and every constructor must have a different signature, right? So whenever I'm saying signature, so we have already discussed method signature, right? Signature means name of the method and the parameters of the method. The name and parameter should not be same, right? Name is going to be same, but the parameter should not be same. You cannot define two constructor with the same parameter, right? If you try to, suppose I'm trying to define another constructor with the same parameter, then I will get some error. Why? Because already you have one constructor which is taking 3 integer type parameter. Then how you can define again one constructor with 3 parameter? You can define one constructor with 2 parameter. That is fine, right? Even if you want to define one constructor with 0 parameter, then that is also fine. That means what we need to understand is we can define multiple constructor inside a class, but the parameters is going to be different. Different in the sense the number of parameters, the order of parameters, and the type of parameters is going to be different. See in this case, so here you can see the number of parameters is going to be different. In this case, the number of parameters is going to be different. Here 3 parameters, here 2 parameters, here 1 parameter. Now I'm going to define another constructor, string j int I. So in this case, if you compare these two examples, the number of a parameter is going to be same, but the type of the parameter is going to be different. Why? Now here it is taking integer, here it is taking string and integer. That means the type of the parameter is going to be different, right? I'm defining another example, right? So here I'm defining integer and here I'm defining string, right? So here also the order of the params. Here you can say this is taking one integer and one string. Here it is also taking one integer and one string, but the order of the parameter is going to be different. So here the first parameter is string, the second parameter is int. Here first parameter is int and the second parameter is string, right? So now if you compare, you will see that no method signature is same. Every method signature is going to be different. Every method signature is going to be different based on the number, type, and order of a parameter, right? Even you can create a parameter without parameter. Even you can create a constructor without parameter. That is also acceptable. This is also acceptable, right? So you can create any number of a constructor inside it. Is that clear? See, we will come to this point later when we will discuss overloading, right? If you look at my, if you look at our course syllabus, right? If you look at our course syllabus, there is inside the OOPS concept only, we have some concept called method overloading, right? So in method overloading only, we are going to discuss what is overloading, how to overload a method, how to overload a constructor, when we need to go for overloading, what is the advantages of doing overloading, right? Everything we are going to discuss at that time. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So the point that you need to remember, you can define n number of constructors, right? N number of means one argument constructor and n number of a parameterized constructor. You cannot define more than one parameterless constructor. Parameterless constructor can be only one, but you can define n number of a parameterized constructor based on the parameter. Parameter means you need to give a different number, type, and order of a parameter to each constructor. You cannot define two constructors with the same parameter. That is not possible, right? So this is about constructor overloading, but we have not given any example as of now because we do not know what is overloading, right? So once we start discussing the overloading, that is method overloading, at that time you will get a very good idea related to this. What is overloading, when we need to go for overloading, how to overload a method, how to overload a constructor, right? Everything we will discuss at that time only, right? Now there is also another concept called a static constructor, right? So static constructor means what? Now, if you create a constructor by using the static keyword, or you can say by using the static modifier, then that constructor is going to be a static constructor, right? And the rest of all are non-static constructor. That means the example what you have seen here, all are non-static constructor only, right? All are non-static constructor, or you can say instance constructor. See, I have not used the keyword static anywhere. So whenever you create a constructor using the static keyword, then that constructor is said to be a static constructor, and rest of all are non-static constructor. In this example, do I have used any static keyword in any of the constructor? No, I have not used static keyword, means all are a non-static constructor only. So the constructor what we have discussed so far, all are the example of non-static constructor. Is that clear? Right? So if you create a constructor by using the static keyword, then that constructor is said to be a static constructor, right? And one more point that you need to remember is, see here I can use public, private, protected, everything. So you can use public constructor, right? You can use here private constructor, right? Here you can use protected constructor. That is acceptable. But the point that you need to remember is you cannot use any access specifier like public, private, protected, etc. in a static constructor. Static means the signature is going to be like this. This is your class name. Constructor name should be same as the class name. And two things that you need to remember related to static constructor. Static constructor cannot take any parameter. You cannot pass any parameter to the static constructor. Why? That we are also going to discuss. And it should be created using the keyword static, and it should not have any access specifier like public, private, and protected. Is that clear? Right?
Yes.
Yes,
So
yes.
things that you need to remember, static constructor means it's a constructor. Constructor means the name should be same as the class. That is for sure. What is the difference between a static and a non-static constructor means it cannot be parameterized. Static constructor cannot be parameterized, right? We'll have one separate chapter where we'll discuss the difference between static and a non-static constructor. But for now, the static constructor cannot be parameterized. You cannot use explicitly any public, private, and protected keyword, and static constructor should be created using the static keyword. But once you compile the constructor, right, then it will create the static constructor. See, in this case, if you look at this example, this is a static constructor, right? But once you compile this code, then you will see this class having two different constructors. Can anybody tell me why, after compiling this code, why we have two different constructors? Two constructors. Can anybody tell me? Anybody tell me why we have two constructors? See, first of all,
It is one to initialize the static members, one to initialize the non-static members, and non-static member initialization is by default, I think.
right, absolutely right. See, we have static constructor. Static constructor is basically used to initialize the static member of your class. The non-static constructor is going to initialize the non-static member of your class, right? If you are explicitly providing static constructor means compiler will not provide any implicit static constructor, right? But how you are going to initialize the non-static member of your class? You have not defined any non-static constructor, na? So to initialize the non-static member of your class, compiler will provide you the non-static. Right? So you can say the static constructor means it's used to initialize the static member of your class. Non-static constructor means going to initialize the non-static member of your class. And as part of this class, you have not defined any non-static constructor explicitly. So the compiler will provide this implicit default constructor for you, right? That you need to understand, right? So points to remember while working. If a class contains any static variable, then only implicit static constructor comes into the picture. Otherwise, we must define them explicitly, right? So to understand this point, what I need to understand is, right? See, in this case, I'm creating some static variable, static integer x. I'm creating some non-static variable, okay? Integer y, right? So whenever your class contains any static variable, then if you have not defined any constructor explicitly, I mean, if you have not defined any static constructor explicitly, then the compiler will going to provide you the implicit static constructor. Now, in this example, I have not defined any static constructor. Even I have not defined any you can say any non-static constructor. So in this example, to initialize the static variable, the compiler will provide one static constructor, and to initialize the non-static variable, the compiler will provide you one non-static constructor, right? Let's build this solution and let's try to see the ILDSM code. Okay, now open ILDSM code. Once you open the ILDSM tool, then go to the exe location where your exe is generated and then load the exe, right? So once you load the exe, you will see that. See, this is your static constructor class. So you can see we are having static integer x, integer y, and static main. This is static variable. This is main method. This is CTR. Where is the static constructor? You have done something wrong, I think. Okay, so it should have static constructor. Build the application. Okay. Then open Visual Studio ILDSM tool. ILDASM tool. Static constructor.
So do we need to call the initialize the object, then it will allocate, or
No, it should be there now. Private static constructor means if you are not okay. So let's do other thing. Okay, let's create a class public example. Achha, I think I have not initialized, that's why sir. It should have the static constructor public class example static integer x equals to some value, right? Static admin may not admin some method, static for some method. I'm some writing some statement, some method execution started, right? So what I'm doing, I'm just creating the example equals to new example. Okay, sorry. Build succeeded. Okay, now open the ILDASM tool. See, you can see. You can see now the static constructor is gone, right? So you can see, I think I have not initialized the variable. That's why the static constructor are not coming at that time. But now you can see inside both the classes, we have something called CCTR. You can see CCTR. And you can see this is preceded with the S symbol. S symbol means this is your static constructor. This is your static constructor. This is the IL code of your static constructor. So you can see inside both the classes, example class, you are having one static constructor as well as non-static constructor. And inside this static constructor demo class, you are having one static constructor as well as one non-static constructor. So what it means, now it means if your class having any static data member, to initialize those static data member, we need one static constructor, right? For example, if I remove this one, so now from this class I remove this, right? And I will make this as a void method, right? Now in this case, this example class having any static data member or not? No. That means if this class doesn't have any static data member, then compiler will not provide any static constructor, because compiler if provide the static constructor, then what is the use of that constructor? No use, because it is not going to initialize anything. If it is not going to initialize, then computer is not a dumb person. He have intelligent person. So as per his intelligence, he knows that if the class doesn't have any static constructor, then if I am providing the static constructor implicitly, then that constructor is never going to be used. That is useless. And why should I provide the useless things to someone? Right? This is the reason why. So you can see now the static constructor will not be there inside this example class. You can see only CTR, only the non-static constructor. But inside this class, you can see the static constructor, because inside this class we have some static data member. So we have X, This is the variable. We have one other method. This is a static member, right? So as you have static member inside the static constructor class, so so the compiler will providing you the default static constructor, right? And in this class, you do not have any static member. So as you do not have any static member, so the compiler will not provide the static constructor, but the compiler will provide the non-static constructor. You can see the non-static constructor is there. Why? Because it's a non-static class. Non-static class means whether your class having some non-static member or not, that is not an issue. But you can create an instance now. While creating the instance, you need to invoke the constructor, and you do not define any constructor. So it will provide you the default constructor, right? Default non-static constructor, but it will not provide you the default static constructor. Why? Because the class doesn't have any static member. But in this case, it will provide you the static constructor, default static constructor. Why? Because your class having some static data, right? Is that clear?
Yes, sir. So, do we need to initialize the static member to some value? Then only it will happen, or?
Yeah. So static are going to be initialized, right? Only once. So you need to initialize, right? So you need to initialize the static member. Because why? Now these are not part of your non-static member, right? So in your non-static constructor is going to initialize the value of the non-static data members only. Static constructor is going to initialize the static data member only. So if you want to initialize, means you need to provide some values. These are not part of your object, right? Object is these are not going to be created for object. We'll see that, right? So how this member are going to be created, right? For this object is required, for this object is not required. So you can access this directly, right? So to initialize the static data member, you need a static constructor, and if you are providing the static constructor, then that is well and fine. If you are not providing the static constructor, then the compiler will provide you the static constructor. And one more thing, the static constructor is the first block of code in your application to be executed. The static constructor is the first block of code of your application to be executed. For example, suppose I'm creating one static constructor here. So static constructor, right? So I'm just printing this statement, right? Static constructor execution. Static constructor started. So in this case, so once your this class execution start, right? So first of all, this block is going to be executed. So we know our program execution is always going to start from where? Program execution is going to start from main method, right? But before execute, it will start from the main method, that is for sure. But before executing the main method body, before executing this three piece of statement, first of all, it will execute this statement, and after executing this statement, it will execute this statement, right? Now if you run the application, you will see the same thing. Okay, let's put a breakpoint here. Let's put a breakpoint here. So you will. So in order to run, we need to close this. Yeah. See, before executing the main method, before executing this statement, it will start executing from the constructor, static constructor, which means the static constructor is the first block of code that is going to be executed inside a class, right? Now if you see, once the static constructor execution completed, then it will come to the main method body and it will start executing the main method. Is that clear? So static constructor means those are going to be executed once your class execution start. And guys, one more thing. So okay, so let's do this thing. So what I'm doing, so I'm just creating this static constructor, right? So let me remove this one from here, right? So what I just need to tell you that, see, when the static constructor is going to be executed, when the class execution is going to be start, right? So when the class execution is going to be start, now when you create an instance of this, or when you invoke any static member of this class. Suppose I'm creating one static member, static integer x equals to 10, right? So yeah, okay. So what I'm doing, I'm just creating an instance and I'm calling the sum method. So example dot sum method. So why this sum method is not available? Because this is outside of the program class. We need to make it as public, right? Once you make public, then it will be available, right? So this is one instance. I'm creating two instances. I'm creating three instances. Instance 2, instance 3, right? I'm invoking the sum method, right? So even though we have created three instances of the employee class, but this static constructor is going to be executed only once. When the first time you are creating the instance, at that time the static constructor is going to be executed, right? Let's put a breakpoint and see this. See, program execution start from the main method. Why? Because this constructor is not executed till. Why? Because we have not executed, or this example class execution not started, right? So you can see first this statement is executed. Once this statement is executed, we are going to create an instance of the example class. We are going to create an instance of the example class means what? Now we are going to use the example class for the first time. As you are going to use the example class for the first time, the static constructor is going to be executed, right? See, so once I press F10, this is not executed. Static constructor started. Okay. Okay. So I have done some mistake. Okay. See, when you are in line number 12, you need to press F11. So previously I just pressed F10, so it moved to the next statement. But now I'm executing F11, right? Once I execute F11, it will come to this block. And you can see static constructor execution is done, right? Then once it back, then okay, then I'm putting a breakpoint here also. So again, it is going to be some method call, right? Some method is called, right? And after some method, and now again I'm pressing F11, but this time this block is not going to be executed. This time this block is not going to be executed. I'm pressing F11. This block is not executed. You can see in the output. So main method started. So program execution started from the main method, and you can see main method execution started. And here I'm creating the first instance. So while creating the instance, this static constructor started is executed. But when I create the second instance, after creating the static constructor started, then I call the sum method. When I call the sum method, this statement is executed. That is what you can see. Now, when I created the object for the second time, this example constructor, this static constructor is not executed. And when I press now, when I press F10, when the next statement is executed, so you can see this method is called. Again, I'm creating the instance. Again, I'm invoking the method. So you can see from this output, you can see you have created the instance 3 times. 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. Even though you have created the instance of the example class 3 times, the static constructor is going to be executed only once. When the class execution start for the first time. It is not necessary that the static constructor is going to be executed when you are creating the instance for the first time. Even though if you access any static member of your class for the first time, the static constructor is also going to be executed. For example, even I want to access this static. So let me make this as public, right? So that I can access it from outside the class. So you can see what I'm doing, example.x. Example.x. I'm writing, I'm just fetching the x value, right? So when this statement is executed, That means at this statement is going to be the program execution start because you are consuming the example class. So here in line number 12 itself, only the constructor, the static constructor is going to be executed, right? So let's run this application. Yeah, program execution started. I'm pressing F10, I'm pressing F11. See, the static constructor execution is started. So it is not mandatory that while you are creating the instance for the first time, the static constructor is going to be executed. In many websites, they are saying that your static constructor is going to be executed when you create an instance for the first time. That is not true. Static constructor is going to be executed when your class execution start for the first time. The class execution means if you are accessing any static variable, the class execution started because you so simply speaking, when you use the example class for the first time in your application, the class execution started, and at that time only the static constructor is going to be executed. So in this place, in line number 12, I'm accessing the X variable using the example class, right? So example class means from here only the class execution starts. So at that point of time, the static constructor is going to be executed. So in this case, once I press F11, so it will come to the static constructor block. Now I'm pressing F11, I'm pressing F10 again. Now I'm pressing F11. So no, nothing is happening. No static constructor is called, right? So some method is invoked. Again, I'm pressing F11. So no static constructor invoked, right? So this means it proves that static constructor is going to be executed only once during the life cycle of a class, right? As the static constructor is going to executed only once during the life cycle of a class, then can anybody tell me how many copies of this X variable will be available in the memory?
Only one copy.
Only one. So you might be know, sir, static variables are created only once during the life cycle of a class. Why? Why? Because static constructor is execute only once. Na? If it execute multiple times, then it will create multiple copies of the variable. But it is executed only one time during the life cycle of a class. So this is the reason why the static variables are created only one time during the life cycle of a class. Is that clear? Clear or not?
Yes. So I have one doubt. Like before creating the object itself, you called the class name, then dot, then that variable name. So can we before initializing only, can we call the members of that just using this dot operator of any class?
This is what I'm doing now. See, in a class, you can define two types of members, right? So just look at my static and a non-static session. So in a class, you can define two types of a member. One is static and one is non-static. Static member, you can access using the help of class name. For non-static member, see, this is a non-static member. You cannot invoke non-static member directly using class. To invoke non-static member, you need instance, right?
Okay.
Right. So in this case, I'm invoking the sum method, but using instance. I cannot invoke this sum method by using the class. You cannot invoke some method like this. It is going to give you some error, right? So you can see it's saying an object reference is required for the non-static field, method, or property. So it's a non-static field means object reference is required. But in this case, X is not an object, right? X is a static. Static means only one copy is there. If one copy is there, then what is the requirement of an object? Object is not required. You can access them directly using the class name. Na? Anywhere you can access. It is not creating separate copies for each object. It is creating one copy for all objects. Is that clear?
Yes. Okay.
And whenever your class, see, this is your class name means wherever you use this class for the first time, at that time only the static constructor is going to be executed, right? It doesn't matter whether you are initializing. It doesn't matter whether you are creating an instance or you are just invoking a static member. First time the static constructor is going to be executed, and it is going to be executed only one time, right? So now.
And only if we have the static data members, otherwise it will not execute.
No, see, this is not mandatory. If your class having some static data member, and if you are not providing the static constructor, then compiler will provide you the static constructor, right? But in this case, if you are providing any static constructor, and if you do not have any data member, then it doesn't matter. So this constructor is going to be executed for the first, right? Because this is the static block. If you are having some static data member, those are going to be initialized. Otherwise, you can write some custom logic. Now that logic is going to be executed only once. Now you can see in this case also, you will see that the static constructor is going to be executed only once. Let's run the application. Right? See, static constructor executed or not static constructor started only one time. So it doesn't matter. But the point that you need to remember is static constructor is basically used to initialize the static data member. And if your class having some static data member, then if you are not defined any constructor explicitly, I mean any static constructor explicitly, then compiler will provide you the static constructor. And if you are providing any static constructor explicitly, then compiler will not provide any static constructor implicitly, right? That is the point that you need to remember. Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay. So static constructor cannot be parameterized. So you cannot pass any parameter to the static constructor. If you pass, then it is going to give you some error. Suppose I'm trying to pass string X. It is going to give you error, right? So see why it is going to give you error. See, this is the first block of code going to be executed. This is the first block of code is going to be executed. And this constructor is called implicitly. See, non-static constructor is calling when we are creating the instance. So in this case, we are making an explicitly call to the non-static constructor. But in this case, so if this, in this case, do we have any explicitly? So in this case, so you can see. So in this case, we are just invoking the static data member. Do I have any explicitly call to the constructor? Am I calling this constructor explicitly? No, I'm not calling the constructor explicitly. This constructor call is implicitly by the compiler. As the constructor is called is implicitly by the compiler, if it is accepting some parameter, then how I can pass this parameter? I do not have any chance to pass parameter to the static constructor now. So as you do not have any chance to pass parameter to the static constructor, so the static constructor is always going to be parameterless because we do not have an explicitly call to the static constructor. Right? We have explicitly called to the non-static constructor because non-static constructor is going to be executed when we are creating an instance. What static constructor means, whenever we are consuming the class for the first time, it is going to be executed implicitly. Automatically, this constructor is going to be called. As it is executed automatically means we do not have chance to pass some value to the static constructor. As we do not have any chance to pass some value to the static constructor, so you cannot define any parameter in your static constructor. If you define, you will get compiled an error. What it is saying, a static constructor must be parameterless. Is that clear?
Yes, sir. I have got a doubt here, Sadi. Suppose if we have static data members and to initialize them, we cannot pass any parameters.
No,
okay,
you cannot
and
pass.
we are assigning directly value to them here. Then what is
Right.
the use of the static constructor here? I'm not getting that.
See, static constructor generally, if you are going, right, generally, if you are developing an application, most of the time, you will not find any static, I mean, you will not find the use of static constructor. But if you want to execute some logic, right, if you want to execute some logic only one time, right, how you can achieve that?
Okay.
Suppose I want to execute some logic. Suppose I want to make sure that whenever my class execution start for the first time, I want to print some data on the console that the class execution started. Example class execution started. Suppose I want to write example class execution started, right? So when the class execution started, I just need to print this message on the console. Without static constructor, how you can implement this?
Okay, I think the static constructor use is to print or to execute anything one time during the whole execution of the class, more than the initializing of the members. Is it
Right.
so?
So suppose you might be said that, sir, what I can do is I can put the statement inside the non-static constructor. Na? I can put the statement inside the non-static constructor. Then the problem is that if you put the statement inside the non-static constructor, then this statement, you cannot give guarantee that this statement is going to be executed. All right. What means now this statement, once you create an instance, right? In this case, if you access the X variable, then this is not going to be executed, right? In this case, suppose I'm commenting this three statement, right? I'm accessing this X variable. I will get the data in the console, right? The X value will be printed on the console, but that statement is not going to be printed, right? See. See, 10 is printed, but did that statement executed? That example class execution started? No. Then you might be seeing that, sir, I can create an instance, and once I create the instance, that statement is going to be executed. Absolutely fine, right? But that statement executed when? After consuming the class for the first time. After consumption, that statement is going to be executed. Yes or no? The example class execution not started here. The example class execution started here only, not here. Again, another disadvantage is that suppose you are creating three statements. Suppose you are creating three instances of the example class. Now, at a time, you will see that how many times that example class execution started. It's a class execution started only once. Then why you are printing the statement three times? It's a wrong message, na? So that is the reason why if you want to execute some logic only one time, right? That logic may be static variable initialization logic or some other custom logic, then you need to put that logic inside the static constructor. Is that clear?
Yes. So we can assign other values of X inside that.
Yes, you can assign X equals to 20. No issue. The same thing you are done with the non-static constructor. You can do the same thing using static constructor. Now, in this case, right? So in this case, you can see in this case. So before printing the X value, this constructor will execute. So it will create one copy of the X variable with the value 10. Then it will initialize that memory location with the value 20. That means in this case, before printing this statement, this constructor execution completed. So you will get that 20 value. See, you are getting the value 20 here. Is that clear?
Yes, yeah, perfect. Thank you.
And in most of the real-time application, right, you will find that some logging mechanism, right? So you can see some logger class. They have created many static method within that logger class, and you can invoke that methods using the class name directly. We'll see one example. We'll see some real-time example using the static, but don't worry. For now, just remember that static means static constructor means going to be executed only once, right? So there can be only one static constructor. It cannot be called explicitly. The static constructor should be without any parameter. It can only access the static members. There should not be any access specifier. If a class is static, then we cannot create. So these are some of the points, right? So we have already discussed this now. So now we are going to stop the session, and the things will continue from tomorrow from this one. Can we initialize non-static data member with a static constructor? Right? Okay, let me complete this one. If you have few minutes, then we can complete. See, inside a static constructor, you can initialize only the non-static. You can initialize only the static member. You cannot initialize the non-static variable. So here you can see I is a non-static variable. You cannot initialize, not allowed. Can you initialize static data field within a static constructor? Yes, you can. So it's a it's a non-static constructor, and static already created now before executing the non-static constructor. Static constructor is called, and the static constructor already created the memory location for the J variable. So you can access and you can do whatever you want. You can initialize, you can use the value, whatever you want, you can do within the non-static constructor. So what is private constructor? See, it is also possible to create a constructor as private. The constructor whose accessibility is private is known as a private constructor. When a class contains a private constructor, then we cannot create an object for the class from outside the class. See? Okay. See, this is the thing. So here your class is having a private constructor, and within the same class you can create an instance, right? But from outside the class you cannot create an instance. For example, suppose I'm taking a class example, and if the class example having one private constructor, let me move that to here only, right? So you cannot create an instance here. You cannot create an instance of this. See, you cannot create an instance of this. Example is inaccessible due to its protection level. So what it means, if your class having one private constructor, then you cannot create an instance of that class from outside the class. But this is partially true. Why it is partially true, that we will discuss in detail, right? If you look at our syllabus, right, then we have some interesting facts and interesting fact about private constructor. So we have a separate chapter called private constructor, where we'll discuss what are the things you can do, what are the misconceptions about among the developers, right? Static and the non-static constructors in CSharp we'll discuss again in detail. And tomorrow I'm going to discuss why we need constructor. So we have discussed what is constructor, and we have discussed what are the different types of constructor. But tomorrow I'm going to show you what is the exact real-time use of a constructor, and then we'll move what is the difference between static and a non-static constructor. Then we'll discuss the private constructor. In private constructor, many confusion, many doubts among the developer, right? They're having some wrong information. We'll clarify all those things when we discuss private constructor.